We'll see how that goes. But we have a ton of questions that rolled in. We have started off the last question, last live that we ended early, talking about Giants against Washington. Let's recap that one quickly. I want to talk about Sterling Shepard since he's back and on track now. So let's talk Sterling Shepard.
Well, Sterling Shepard just gives Daniel Jones another weapon, in which I think finally could be a little bit of a Daniel Jones breakout spot. I mean, it could take a little bit of the sheen off of Slayton or Tate. Obviously, Tate didn't have much sheen prior to this. He's been real disappointing the last couple of weeks. I think he's best left on most people's benches, especially with Shepard re-entering the mix. I think we're getting pretty good news on Darius Slayton, who's got it's a middling matchup with Kendall Fuller of the Washington football team, but it's one I think Darius Slayton, could continue to potentially produce in. That said, I think he's a guy kind of coming off of a good game last week that anytime his value's high or up, we should consider seeing if we could parlay him into maybe a player we find a little more reliable. I do view Slayton as kind of a boom bust guy, probably rest of the season at this point, Yasin. And then Terry McLaurin over on the Washington football team side of things, it was his worst performance of the season last week. I know folks are nervous about that quarterback situation. I think we could see a little stabilization. It's not an easy matchup against James Bradbury, who's had a good season. That's been one of Dave Gettleman's best signings, actually, over on the defensive side for the Giants. But, it's still a moderate matchup, and McLaurin's the kind of guy that can get loose against anybody. So I think we start to plan that for a little bit of a Terry McLaurin bounce back this week, Yasin. And then the other guy, I think Antonio Gibson, right now is pretty game script dependent because of J.D. McKissick's role. This could be a game that stays in a little more of a positive game script situation where I think we could see Gibson rebound as well.
Very cool. So let's talk a little bit about the over-under for that game. I don't expect it to be a shootout. I think your tools would agree. By the way, guys, welcome back. It's Yasin from Fantasy Life app. We have Byron here from Rosterwatch. If you guys don't know what they do, they spend time at training camps, and they have all tools and stuff and models that are actually really respected in the industry for their accuracy. So we're lucky to have Byron on our weekly call like this. So let's talk about the over-under for that game. We're not expecting a shootout. It's probably going to be to the average fan of regular football, it might be exciting if you live in one of those areas. But otherwise, for fantasy purposes, we're not expecting much. Is that right?
Exactly. The sports books in Vegas have this one set as a 44.5-point game total, which is a really low expected game total. And I don't think it's a total surprise because obviously these are two teams that are struggling mightily. I wouldn't be surprised to see it go over. Sometimes we see these NFC East games. They tend to be shootouts. And I actually do, like I said, think this is a bit of a rebound spot for a lot of the guys involved. So yeah, I might take the over on that one if I was a betting man. Yas, I'd be curious to see how it shakes out. But the Giants, 3.5-point favorites at home and a low expected game total, two bad teams. Guys, I think if you're struggling with the fantasy defense, you're having to stream your defense this week and the pickings are slim on your waiver wire, I absolutely think you could take a look at either rolling out the Washington football team or the New York Giants in your season-long leagues as a defense this week.
Very cool. So while we're still in Washington, we have a question about McLaurin. This guy wants to know, should he keep rolling with McLaurin or bench him for Robert Woods with a better matchup? We're talking about weeks specifically.
I think you could bench him for Robert Woods for sure because that's a very solid play, and you don't have as many question marks. We're probably going to have, when it's all said and done, Robert Woods ranked slightly ahead of McLaurin anyway. So that's what I would do. I think it's a safe play and offers similar upside.
Cool. Very cool. All right. We also have a question coming in. Pick two running backs in PPR: Madison, Gaskin, Gurley, and Edmonds. This person also has two wide receivers that they'd like us to pick from, which I'll go to next.
I'm not going to get too smart here. I want to go with Madison. I want to go with Gurley. Madison's an awesome player who, if you saw last week when he gets to work, that dude's a beast. Man, he's going to give you 80, 85, 90% of what Dalvin's going to give you. And then Gurley's on fire, man. I've said it for weeks now. He was a buy low in week 2 or week 3. He's got a great schedule the last few weeks, and he's still got 2 or 3 good matchups here on the horizon. I think you use him, you smoke him while you got him with Gurley, and he looked really good last week, Yasin.
I mean, so here's the thing. Gurley is looking good right now. He didn't start off too hot. People were a little disappointed in Gurley. If he is so hot right now, is this a guy that you would look at and say, you know what, I really don't want to absorb the ups and downs that I might get with him. Do I trade him while he's hot?
I think he is a guy to consider trading while his value is high. The two questions I would ask myself. first is who can I trade up for? I mean, you don't want to make a marginal change. It needs to be for a really good player, right? And then the other thing that I would look at, Yasin, again, is, the number one mandate is to try to win now. It's very difficult to give up good players with great matchups this week and next week. Like, sometimes that's a ruse, man. You outsmart yourself. You'd be better off just stockpiling the wins. And I truly think Gurley's a guy that can do that right now.
Very cool. All right, let's talk about Madison again, because we skimmed over that really quickly. So it sounds like, logically, there's a case to be made that they're actually going to sit Cook because there's a bye week afterwards. We don't really have a definitive answer yet. We might get that definitive answer later today. We likely, it's possible that we do. You're saying play Madison over Gaskin and Edmonds, assuming that Cook doesn't play, correct?
Yeah, exactly. That's right, Yas. This is a 57-point expected game total at home in Minnesota. It's everything you ever dreamed of if you happen to own Alexander Madison. This is the time.
Cool. All right. I want to talk really quickly. Let's take a look at the board here. Denver, New England. This is a game that has been, we've been waiting for this one, right? It looked like Cam wasn't going to play. Now it looks like Cam is going to play. Josh McDaniels said Cam Newton looked normal at practice yesterday. Just now. So what do you think?
I think you can definitely go back to Cam Newton if you want to. I own him in a couple of leagues. I definitely would have no qualm starting him if I needed to. I'm going to be looking at him versus guys like Roethlisberger, Stafford, some of my other quarterbacks I own in those leagues. So I think he's kind of in that range, a guy that could go off any single week. But, there is a little bit of a floor you get concerned about there. I think it's a solid, matchup. I'm not expecting the game total to be too high in this one. It's 45.5-point game total. New England, big 9.5-point favorites. Oftentimes that tends to favor the running game for the team that's a big favorite like that. But obviously Cam can get involved there. And look, they're going to have to take the lead somehow. And I think all that points back to Cam. So yeah, if you're in the Cam Newton business and you need to play him, I have no problems with that at all. And I think, Yasin, have we seen is Drew Lock? Are we still waiting word on Drew Lock on the other side, correct?
Drew Lock looks like Drew Lock is going to play. It's all but a lock at this point, but I guess we'll get official news later today.
Yeah, well, that's going to be an interesting one. Well, look, if you're a Jerry Jeudy owner, I think Noah Fant's probably going to be out this week. Jerry Jeudy, it's potentially a tough matchup with Gilmore back in the mix, but Judy's a guy who can get open against anybody, and it's hard to make the argument that he's not going to get massive volume in this situation. Clearly, Drew Lock is a big upgrade for a guy like Jeudy instead of playing with, Brett Rippon or whatnot. So I think, you hesitate, but if you need to roll Jerry Jeudy as a wide receiver 3 this week, I think it's fine. And then clearly getting Lock back in there is an upgrade for the running backs. I think we're still waiting to see exactly what Melvin Gordon's role will be this weekend. You guys are going to need to watch out for that. But it's certainly a positive for all the skill players that are going to be active on the Broncos side.
So speaking of skill players that are potentially active, just so everybody's on the same page, Drew Lock, it looks like he's going to be in line. However, Fant is truly questionable. There is no update at the moment on that at the moment. I would say have a backup plan ready. But some other news has come out this morning. So the 4 tests that returned positive this morning with the Colts, they've already been confirmed as false positives. We sent this out a little while ago. They will reopen the facility and continue prep for Sunday's game. So it looks like a false call there. I think we're getting sort of numb to these things this season. But what do you expect out of that Colts game this week?
Well, hallelujah, Yasin, because we don't want to see too many of these games just keep falling through like this. It's really already an arduous season as it is. All right, we got the Colts as 9.5-point favorites, expected game total 46.5 points on the sportsbook coming out of Vegas. So these are big time favorites at home against the Bengals with the rookie, Joe Burrow. Look, I haven't been impressed with really what I've seen out of Jonathan Taylor this season. We really are almost everybody's top ranked running back in the NFL draft process, or at least a consensus top 3 guy, all-time leading rusher at Wisconsin, ran the 4.38 at the combine. I don't think anybody's been blown away by what they've seen on the field yet, and to me, that's probably why you're seeing the Colts still give give a little bit of a committee a run there. That said, 18 touches a game, Taylor, behind the good offensive line. Again, I think he's a guy that if you can, maybe you trade him, you package him up, try to trade him, get up to a more reliable player you like better. But if you own Jonathan Taylor, I think you treat him as a running back too in this matchup and moving forward. And then, T.Y. Hilton, I can't buy the 10 target performance last week. I got to see that one again. I'd have to be desperate to play T.Y. Hilton in this one. The tight end situation has devolved into a three-headed monster. We've got Trey Burton, we've got Jack Doyle.
You can call it a monster at this point. I feel like it's a three-headed puppy.
Three-headed peewee, little skimpy, three-headed pipsqueak is what we would probably call it, right?
Beast.
So, yeah, I don't – and then you obviously on the other side, you worry about Joe Mixon. Look, Joe Mixon basically one of the league leaders in volume. He's actually been good on yards after contact, which he's going to need this year because that line has not been very good. But I think we saw it last week, like, even with the volume, he's going to come back down to earth oftentimes in that offense this year, especially in the difficult matchups. And there's not much more of a difficult matchup on the schedule than going to the Colts, whose defense has been incredibly tough this season on all fronts. So you worry a little bit if you're a Joe Mixon owner this week. I mean, definitely. I don't know that you can bench him, but I think you should temper expectations. And, maybe if I had a guy like Jonathan Taylor, maybe I would consider him over Joe Mixon this week in that same, matchup over there. And then look, T. Higgins, the rookie out of Clemson, T. Higgins, pretty quickly fast tracking to be Joe Burrow's number one. I think it's pretty clear he's already his number two. If you own Higgins, again, it's going to be a tough matchup this week against those Colts, but you're feeling really, really good about owning T. Higgins at this point, Yasin. And then, of course, Tyler Boyd, if you own him and need to start him, I think that's just fine too.
Cool. Let's take a look at Julio Jones. What would you do with Julio Jones? He's barely played, had him on my bench. Do I keep holding in the event of a trade or a quick rehab and bounce back? Can I just say I don't think he's not going to be traded if that's what you're asking, if the team is going to trade him. I sincerely doubt he will be traded. But let's talk about what you're doing with Julio Jones. Holding, starting.
Well, I think it depends. We still have a questionable tag on Julio, or do we have something? Have we had something come in here in the last few minutes?
So I'll check the app to see what the most updated info is, but I don't think there's any additional news at the moment yet.
Yeah. When I was looking at Julio last night, actually, I mean, things were still kind of up in the air. So my take on Julio Jones is that this depends on your record and your circumstances with your team and your league. Like if you're a losing team that has to win now, you can't afford to just keep. I know you don't want to sell at a discount or sell quote unquote low on the guy, but you have to see what players you can get in return that are respectable players that can help you win this week. If you're a Julio Jones owner that's in big trouble, you can't keep living like that. It's you won't be a good fantasy player if you do. On the flip side, look, a lot of it will come down to perception and what are people willing to give up in your leagues for Julio Jones. We're not going to sell him for peanuts, obviously. We'll do a discount if we need to in order to make something happen to improve our team this week. But, we're not going to take a wooden nickel for him either. And, then I think if you're not a Julio Jones owner and you are a winning team with maybe one loss and a whole bunch of assets that you've accumulated, to me, Julio Jones is a great guy to pursue if you're operating from that type of position of strength.
So it's really dependent on where you are in the season and what your record potentially is. That makes a lot of sense. All right, so let's stay in Atlanta for a bit. I mean, we had that scare that Atlanta wasn't going to potentially play. Turns out that everything's okay now. They're opening up the facility. They'll be good for the game. Let's talk about that game a little bit. Let's talk about the other offensive weapons for that team. I mean, their fantasy prospects are certainly better than their real life, like real NFL prospects. But they have a coaching change now. What is it? How does this impact everything? What are the other weapons that you're targeting, either as a trade target or people that maybe you're fading in that offense from a fantasy perspective?
Well, we got a 57-point projected game total. It's the highest on the slate. I mean, that's an absolute monster projection. I mean, Vegas thinks this is going to be a big-time shootout. Yasin. So, the way that I look at it is if we want to look on the Minnesota side of things, I think what we're basically talking about, we've already talked about Alexander Madison. Like, clearly he's a must start if there's no Dalvin, and you should feel like he's an RB1 to basically, if you're starting him this week, you should feel very bullish about that. The thing with Adam Thielen, you worry a little bit because he's an 8-target guy who's basically making his living out of the end zone at what historically is an unsustainable rate in terms of the composition of his current levels of fantasy production, Yasin. That said, at some point, you just got to realize when that's what a specific guy's role on the team is sometimes, even if it's a bit of a statistical outlier. And I absolutely think that's the situation with Adam Thielen. I mean, he's a top 5 receiver on the season. And, it could regress a little bit, but in the end, like, you expect him to be very involved in this game. You're feeling good about rolling him out in what's one of the best matchups possible at home against Atlanta. I think it's hopefully a get right spot if you're a Justin Jefferson guy. I don't think he's not a must start as a rookie, but clearly if you need to play him as like a wide receiver 3 or a flex, I think this is as good a spot as you can possibly cook up for a rebound there. And then when I look at the other side, I guess the guy that really interests me, Yasin, the most, I think we know Calvin Ridley is a really good player, and whether Julio's in or not, you're going to get probably really nice production from Ridley. The guy I really want to see is, are we going to get a Hayden Hurst rebound? Because volume and the yardage really were never there, but he was at least producing earlier in the season, and we got a little bit of lip service from the offensive coordinator there that they needed to get him more involved, but haven't quite seen it happen yet. And I think no Julio. I mean, you would like to see Atlanta, a struggling team, start integrating Hayden Hurst a little bit more. I think it's kind of a desperation play this week if you have to play him. But if I would actually, if it was it's a desperation play, I think you can feel halfway decent about it. Put it that way.
Yeah, got it. So we have some more questions coming in that I want to get to a little bit. For example, we had, let's see, this one, a really big one. Clyde Edwards-Helaire. What are we doing with him? Are we potentially selling? Who is a potential trade target? Is it too early? Do we need to sit back and sort of? So here's what I think is going to happen, right? He also might not even have a great role in the following game. So I think you don't try to trade Helaire now. I think you wait until people see, 2 weeks and he's still producing the next 2 games, and now all of a sudden the perceived value is going to be higher than his actual long-term down the line value. So I'm not selling on CEH today. I am buying Bell. I am prepping to sell CEH later, but I'm not offering. I mean, he's an obvious sell low at the moment, and that's what I think. What do you think? You have the stats and the data. What do your models suggest is going to happen in that backfield?
Well, I think when you look at it, maybe compare it to a situation like Leonard Fournette going to the Bucs to kind of ruin Ronald Jones' situation. That was what the line of logic was as soon as that signing occurred. I think it's easy to try to draw an equivalency between these two, and I think there's an argument to be made that maybe we shouldn't totally be ready to throw Clyde Edwards-Helaire totally out of the window quite yet. That said, if you compare him to Ronald Jones, they're 2 different types of backs, and I do believe Clyde Edwards-Helaire is more of a satellite back. And so that is, I think if you're being fair, that's kind of the expectation. Now, I'm inclined to think the way you're thinking, Yasin, is I think just generally speaking, I think in most leagues, he's going to be a sell low right now. So if that's the case, if I'm only going to get peanuts on the dollar for Clyde Edwards-Helaire right now, my line of thought is play him this week, play him next week, get everything you can out of him, because I think that people are going to be sleeping on him a little bit right now, but it's going to take a minute for Le'Veon Bell to integrate with this offense. I think you should get what you can out of Clyde at this point. And then, like you said, that might turn the tides a little bit. Maybe you have a little bit of a more marketable situation there with Clyde. I think the other thing you could look at is if somebody is just ready to throw their hands up and give Clyde up for nothing in your league, I think you could flip it on your head and say, wait a second here. We're worried about the situation, but no, you don't know exactly how this is going to turn out. If I could get Clyde Edwards-Helaire for peanuts on the dollar at this point, like, I don't necessarily mind receiving him either. And, maybe just planning on him being a flex, but who knows, man? He could still have a little bit more upside than that, Yasin.
Yeah, I think he's a good guy for upside for down the line, especially. So let's move over to Houston. We have a question about Brandon Cooks coming back to life last week. Is he worth a start in week 6, or is on your roster, or is he actually on your starting roster, or is he more of a bench guy at the moment?
I think he's still ideally more of a bench guy, but I do believe you can start him if you need to. I mean, here's the thing with Cooks. I'm a Cooks owner in one league. I've been watching this I watch everything very closely, but you know how it is, Yasin, when you watch these certain situations real close. And here's the deal. Cooks has been getting a monster snap count since week 1. And in most games, he's actually gotten a good amount of the target share. And if you watch, I think Brandon Cooks looks good. He looks good out there. And the problem was we were predicting the big breakout in week 4. It didn't happen because it seemed like that was the right spot at home, that it was going to happen. It didn't happen. So it's kind of a Johnny, it's kind of a Johnny come lately. He came in and he blew up this last week. So you have mixed feelings about him. I think it's an indication that Brandon Cooks is going to be fantasy viable as the season progresses. But to me, what's occurred is it just took some time for Deshaun Watson to develop chemistry and trust with Brandon Cooks. And I think that we're going to see that continue to grow. So he's not a must start. I think you can play Cooks this week if you need to. Certainly, he's still like a wide receiver 3 or 4 type that I think is just trending in the right direction. Could eventually be a really good wide receiver 3 if we keep tracking like this.
Cool. So let's stay there. Let's stay in Houston for a bit. Let's talk about Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson, I love the guy. I love him personally as a player, as a person. He's not performing fantasy-wise like I would have liked him to. But I think I think he's got, they had their first win after firing their coach, and it seems like things are looking up. What do you think for Deshaun Watson the rest of the season?
Yeah, I think we discussed this last week. If you look at the Texans' schedule, we're to a pretty enticing portion of the schedule here for about a month in a row where it just seems like a really really good get right spot for Watson and the rest of that offense. Like, I'm expecting that offense to start heating up here, and we saw the beginning of it last week. If you look at it again, Watson was a guy with a very difficult early season strength of schedule. To me, he was if he's a buy low quarterback trade target in your league, I don't necessarily recommend usually working too hard to trade for quarterbacks, because I think most of the time you can play waiver wire. But for a guy like that, I could be interested. I think if things are in store for Watson, that's good for, everybody else. I'm not sure it's going to be the season you hope for, especially when you compare him to the Russell Wilsons and the Kyler Murrays and the Josh Allens and all the guys that he was being drafted with this year.
He's not tier 1, not this year at least. Not yet, and I don't think it's going to happen.
And I'm a big Watson guy. I loved Watson coming out. So, you and I are on the same page with that one. You lose DeAndre Hopkins. The coach, it's just a bad organization.
You give away DeAndre Hopkins.
I mean, it's just, look what he's doing. And you got David Johnson, who the fantasy points are fine and the matchups are good right now. So I think you keep plugging along. But anybody watching the games, I mean, Texans fans think they think he's an old corpse of a body that's being rolled out there every single week. And he doesn't look good, you know what I mean? But clearly they don't have too many other options. So I think, the matchups are good. Get what you can out of David Johnson. He may be a guy to look to sell high if we can keep plugging along here with a couple of games, good games the next few weeks.
Okay, so the current perceived value on David Johnson, you're saying, is high, and that could make him a piece that you can move around and trade with somebody else to maybe upgrade. You're saying with somebody else who might be undervalued. Is that right?
Yeah, I think David Johnson is a guy I'm a little bit worried about long-term on the season based on what I've seen. I think he's being propped up right now by a good schedule. So that's fine. Use him if you need to. Like I said, the main mandate is to get wins right now, Yasin. But yeah, I think you should have some foresight with his schedule. And as he starts, his marketability increases during this soft part of the schedule. I think an opportunistic, good fantasy player will look to see if they can parlay him into an asset they view as more premium for the rest of the season.
Let's talk the other side of that game. Let's talk Tennessee. You've got some update this morning. Corey Davis is one of the few players still left on COVID IR. So he's not activated yet. But it's looking like the majority of those players are now off. I expect Corey Davis. I mean, it looks if it follows the trend of everybody else, he'll be off in a few days as well, and might actually be ready for the game, though he's not off yet. That said, let's talk about this offense. I mean, it's a high-powered offense in my opinion. You have Derrick Henry, who's the obvious, the diamond on that team. What about everybody else? Because I think we don't need to talk about Derrick Henry. I think the guy is pretty solid. Maybe touch up on his matchup for just this week, and then we can move on to the other weapons on that team.
Sure, and this is just a reminder that in this game, Vegas has this one as a 55-point expected game total. Another big one, Yasin. The Titans 5.5-point favorites at home. So, I think when you talk about the other guys, I mean, everybody saw what A.J. Brown did in his return, and he actually, it's a big – Bradley Roby is kind of a big name corner on the other side, but if you look at the matchup, A.J. Brown is actually slated to have – this is a good matchup for A.J. Brown. So I think that if you have him, if you traded for him, or if you just held on to him, you're feeling really good about A.J. Brown, who looks like an excellent wide receiver 2 is what I would call him at this point. And then, I mean, Jonnu Smith, man. I mean, how many tight ends can you trust more than Jonnu Smith this year? I mean, you can count them on one hand, I think. So Jonnu Smith basically must start tight end in this kind of matchup. And, by association, Ryan Tannehill. I mean, this last
hey, really quick, we're going to get to Ryan Tannehill in a second, but just to clarify any concerns that anybody had, Zach, coach of the Bengals, just said that Mixon is back. He is good to go for Sunday. So no worries there. It was a personal reason yesterday, and there was no reason to think that he wasn't going to make it. Just to clarify, though. So let's go back to Ryan Tannehill.
Yeah, so the thing with Tannehill was we saw last year when he got to Tennessee and he took the job from Mariota that he was actually a really viable fantasy play most of the season. Your concern always was that he was such a low-volume passer that any given week that could really, really dry up. And the fact is, man, that guy has strung it all the way together into this season, has become a really good streaming quarterback option. As a matter of fact, I don't think you're going to be able to stream. Pretty soon he's just going to be rostered. So Tannehill, that's a guy in this match, 55 points. I mean, that's a game that you feel really good about getting Ryan Tannehill out in this week.
All right, so some updates. So Corey Davis might be good for Sunday. Coach disagrees, so I want to clear that up. Vrabel just said he's not optimistic about Corey Davis being back off the COVID list for Sunday. So alternate plans. Nobody was starting him anyway, but don't expect him to be back for Sunday. Just while we were on Tennessee, that news just came out. I wanted to make sure that got out. Other news coming out of Bengals. AJ Green will play. Now I don't think he's finished the last 2 games. Some of it seems to be frustration. You were talking about T.Y. Hilton this past week, and I think they're let's see. Yeah, I mean, they're playing like one guy that used to have a really great name in fantasy versus another guy that used to have a really great name in fantasy. Looks like T.Y. Hilton had a blip on the radar in terms of his targets last week. AJ Green just hasn't had any sort of upside at all this year. So yes, he will be available on Sunday, but are you taking the bait? I'm guessing no.
No, I mean, it's a losing strategy to wait on these kind of guys all season, Yasin, and especially losing strategy to keep rolling them out. I mean, what else do you need to see? Look, it's getting close to the point where you can drop AJ Green. I hesitate to say that just because it's him, and I think it depends on who you're dropping him for. But I think this is the last week. If we don't see something really good out of AJ Green, a lot of people are going to have to start dropping him, Yasin, for guys who are going to be more valuable off the waiver wire. It's just it's dead weight on your roster. And no, I don't think you can start him this week. I think if you own him, you're hoping to God that he puts up some points, and maybe you can. I don't even know if you can trade him after one good game. Maybe you want to make a decision after that. But I think that sometimes it's best just to relinquish these headaches and move on to the next play. It's next man up. You know what I mean? I think we're dangerously close to that with AJ Green.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd say that as a person who added him to my team a few weeks ago.
I mean, I'd like to see him traded. Why don't maybe he's totally washed, but I'd like to see somebody like the Texans or the 49ers or somebody, that could use a bigger body wide receiver on the outside, Patriots, even Packers, somebody with a little more firepower. I'd be interested in seeing an AJ Green trade It doesn't make sense. I mean, but we'll just have to see. I think it's an interesting one to watch.
Cool. All right, let's talk. So we went to the Titans game down against the Texans. Let's stay in Texas. Let's go to the Monday night game, Dallas against Arizona. I want to talk about Andy Dalton. I mean, he's got to be one of the hot pickups this week, a speculative pickup, I think. Can we talk about Andy Dalton a little bit? What do you expect out of him over the next, let's say, 4 weeks at least?
Well, it was probably the most important offseason signing in the entire league, especially in retrospect now. I mean, you don't want to let your entire season fall to waste due to one injury, and I think the Cowboys did a good job hedging against that. Local guy out of TCU over there in Fort Worth from Texas, Andy Dalton. I think you can have pretty good expectations for Dalton, especially in this matchup at home against Arizona. Let's see, the game total for this one, 52 points. So it's a pretty expected high-scoring affair, even there with Dalton. The Cowboys are 3-point favorites, so I think they expect this to be kind of a back-and-forth game. I like Dalton. I think he's fine. If you need a streaming quarterback, I think he's up there with like Tannehill, right? We just talked to Tannehill. Like he's one of the really good potential waiver wire quarterbacks that was out there this week. To me, I think the more salient question is, like, everybody knows Zeke is about to get more volume. Like, that's just going to be the situation. We'll see how his efficiency is. It hadn't been great behind that porous offensive line and injured offensive line this year. I think defenses are going to start to get to key in on him a little bit more. But what can you do if you're a Zeke owner? You're happy you're going to get hopefully increased volume. To me, Yasin, what do you do with Amari Cooper? What do you do with CeeDee Lamb? I mean, do you just have to just take it, and you have to just say, well, I got to live with 75% or 80% of what these guys were just worth a week ago? Like, is that how I'm just got to live and plan?
I'm looking at it
forward?
I'm actually benching CeeDee Lamb this week to see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, it very easily could be a wait and see situation. I think these are two guys that it depends on how your league mates feel. I could consider trading Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb right now. I don't know how depressed their value is with the Dalton news in your league, but the fact is those guys are coming off of good games with good production really on the season. So name value, production, those guys I think carry value in your league. I don't know how much Dalton is separated now.
This is our third live together, and I think I'm finally disagreeing with you. I don't think this is the week to try to find out what their value is trading with somebody. I just think that – so I'm more into the psychology of things. I don't think people are going to be moved by the stat line of the last game when Dak was still in it for majority of the game. I think people are going to wait and see to see what their actual value is. And I think if you start putting them on the trading block, people are going to give a steep discount because they're going to think you're nervous, and they're going to jump at that trade like a shark. So I would not put either of those guys on the trading block because people are going to think that you don't think they're that great, especially if you're looking to sell. They're going to lowball you. I wouldn't trade them.
I think it's a real possibility. It doesn't mean I wouldn't test the market and see what's out there. I don't think that you trade them, throw your hands up and trade them no matter what for some crappy offer. But to your point, that may not be available just because of the psychology, which is definitely a concern. Bottom line is you're worried about those guys. I mean, look at Amari Cooper. He's been 11 targets a game, only 7.7 yards per reception, only 1 touchdown on the season. He's been living on volume. And if those numbers don't change, if his volume erodes at all, which it's unclear whether it will under Dalton, you're going to see kind of a hit to him. Look, Amari Cooper is a wide receiver 2 on the season. CeeDee Lamb is a wide receiver 2 on the season. In half-point PPR, that's the number 18 and number 19 wide receivers, respectively, on the season. Actually, Lamb, the number 18, performing a little bit out in front, of Cooper. Can they stay as wide receiver 2s? I think potentially, but I'm very worried about if the volume falls off with Cooper at all. I don't think we're going to see his efficiency increase. I don't see how there's any way any of these receivers can become get a concentrated amount of touchdowns or red zone targets. There's just too many good players on offense, and we've had kind of a step back here. And then at quarterback, and if you look at CeeDee Lamb, he's only been going 8 targets a game. He's not touchdown dependent. He's only scored twice, and he's been going at astronomical, almost 11 yards per reception. I mean, of the top 25 receivers in the league to date, I mean, that's an astronomical number. So I think that looks good, but you also worry, what if CeeDee Lamb's efficiency takes a step back here because of the Dalton situation? All of a sudden, I think you're going to see his value erode possibly to a wide receiver 3. So maybe more stuff just to be conscious of than anything, Yasin.
Cool. All right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to do a few minutes. I'm going to do maybe a minute on a news recap of things that have come out in the past 20 minutes or so. And then we're going to go down a hot list of questions that I want to get to, things including that trade question, which you can think about, or in terms of the Aaron Jones question that you see on the screen while I'm doing this recap. So Sterling Shepard, it seems like actually reporters think it's safe to rule him out this week. But it's to be determined for the Eagles game next Thursday. So that's something to look out for. I would not slot him into a potential starting lineup. Obviously, we talked about Corey Davis. The coach doesn't expect him to be back in time for Sunday. We are expecting A.J. Green to play Sunday. I don't know that anybody cares. All right, Cam Newton is looking normal. That's a good sign. And then Baker Mayfield is looking good at practice. Jarvis Landry is also back, so I think we're happy there. So let me jump to some questions from the app, then we're going to jump to the YouTube questions as well. So this person's asking, should I drop Rager for Shepard full PPR?
It depends on if you need a more immediate play. I'd rather keep Rager as a stash because I don't see Shepard being very viable as a start.
Okay. Is Fulham? I don't even know. Hold on, hang tight. News just came out. Dalvin Cook's not practicing today. Yeah, he's not practicing today. We'll obviously get the full official status on him, but it sounds like he's not going to play. If I were to be a betting man, which I am, so Dalvin Cook's not playing. You mentioned that Madison is an obvious play for you. Where do you slot him?
I mean, I'd say he's a fringe RB1.
Okay.
I think you could expect 75 to 85% of whatever you would have been expecting out of Dalvin Cook in this matchup.
So Dalvin Cook, you're saying he's sort of a watered down. Well, maybe he's not, but the game plan might be a watered down running game plan because he's not Dalvin Cook. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think he's a little bit of a different back than Cook. He doesn't offer as good as I've loved Madison since he came out of Boise. Nobody even heard of Alexander Madison. He was my number 4 running back in that entire class 2 years ago, and that made waves. He's a very important player in the league because he's good at this point. You know, I think the difference is he doesn't have the same juice all the way that Cook has. So I think that's why you got to factor in a discount. But he could be involved in all phases very similarly.
Okay, very cool. So Dalvin Cook likely to be out. Alexander Madison likely to replace him. And we should expect about 80% of the workload / fantasy production out of Madison that we could have expected from Cook. All right, great. So let's jump to a few more questions in the app, but that Cook news has just come out. So let's jump to questions here.
And Cook might have been RB1 this week in that matchup at home, Yasin.
Yeah. So, I was expecting good production out of him. Okay, so I actually don't know how to pronounce this guy's name because I don't watch games as often as I read about them. Fulgham?
Oh, Eagle? Travis Fulgham out of Old Dominion.
Oh, Fulgham? You pronounced the G? Great. Is he a legit flex option? Let's talk about Fulgham down the line. We had a few questions come in on YouTube as well, so let me pull up some of those questions too. But tell me about him. What do you think? I mean, you don't see production like that out of a random rookie, right? Was he even drafted? I don't know.
Well, it's just the craziest thing for me, Austin, is I've been scouting the Senior Bowl for 10 years, and we come away with a lot of really good scouting intel and players, the evaluations on players coming out of there. But Fulgham was a guy this year. We left the Senior Bowl, and we hardly even have a note about him. He was basically a wallflower at the Senior Bowl this year. I think it just goes to show that with Jim Nagy running the Senior Bowl, former internal scout for the Seahawks, he's bringing a lot of good talent in every year. So you have to keep eye out for really anybody. I mean, Chase Claypool was a Senior Bowler, right? And you got to keep an eye out for all of these guys. is he a strong flex play? Is he a flex play? I mean, that's a little aggressive for me. I think he's a desperation flex play. I think he should be rostered and wait and see what happens. But remember, we're potentially getting you just mentioned Rager. We'll be getting Rager back at some point, getting Deshaun Jackson into the fold. It does sound like Fulgham I'm not sure Alshon's going to be able to come in and take that job. It sounds like Fulgham may continue to run at the X and keep that job. So is he a flex? Is he a strong flex? I'm not ready to go there yet. But I think if you have to play him, it's fine. And more than anything, he's a guy you want on your bench just to see like what direction that thing is headed,
Cool. All right. Sounds good. Okay. So we have, we did the news recap. This is Yasin from Fantasy Life. We have Byron from Rosterwatch. We're talking about questions that people have in the app and on YouTube right now. Let's talk about the question that we had from Miguel. PPR, this guy has Aaron Jones as one of his running backs. Which other two, one is a flex, should this person start? We're talking Hunt and Mike Davis. One's a flex, should I start? I think mathematically he's able to start both. Am I reading this wrong? Which other two should I start? Hunt, Mike Davis. I mean, those are both good options, but I think we're missing some of this person's comments, so I'm going to move to somewhere else. Let's talk about this person who's stacked out wide receiver and needs running back help. He's interested in trading CD Lamb for a running back. What tier of running back should this person be looking for?
I think what you'd like to do is buy low on a guy that you view as RB2 chops. Is essentially, I think, what you would want to look at. So let me see if I have any suggestions here from my little trade chart that I make every week, Yasin.
Is that like is that a Rosterwatch trade chart, or is that like your own?
It's my own, and it's the outline I use for our weekly trade cast, which is probably our most popular show on the Rosterwatch YouTube channel and on the Rosterwatch podcast over on iTunes every week. It's a really popular segment for us because not enough people, there's not a great, trades are one of the overlooked things in fantasy. People don't really spend a lot of attention there. It's because it's a little bit of a difficult nut to crack, and it takes some personal curation to do. So that's something that I do every single week of the season. I'll tell you, can you trade CeeDee Lamb for a guy like Antonio Gibson? I think that's a fair trade. To me, something like that is probably a fair trade at this point.
Cool. All right, let's talk Ertz. Is the Ertz owner feeling desperate? As a guy who has Ertz on my roster, I was very excited to draft him as the third or fourth tight end off the board. Yeah, I am feeling a little desperate. I'm feeling a little disappointed. I'm still rostering starting Ertz. This person sees him as a great buy low right now. I agree, but I'm not as good as you, Byron. You have a lot more tools than I do. What do you think?
And unfortunately, another tough matchup for Ertz this week. Look, I think you take one more stab at going after Ertz on the cheap this week, just because alleviating the headache of playing waiver wire tight end all season. I mean, that could be a nightmare. And it's unclear whether Ertz is going to be the solution or not, but it's unclear every week that you go to the waiver wire for some low end, tight end that's going to work out either. To me, at this point, if I can buy low, I'll take one more crack at it. I take my chances at hitching my wagon there, kind of relinquish the headache of the streaming tight end, and let the chips fall where they may. And I think you can feel okay that you made that move. But I tell you, we see another week or so, like 1-2 more weeks of this, man. I think you got to consider being out of the business altogether.
Yeah. All right. So from the app, we have a question: Tannehill or Gardner Minshew rest of season?
I think you got to go with Tannehill.
Byron says Tannehill.
Look at the schedules. First of all, look at the upcoming schedules, because that is a red herring to think about. Can I get this streaming quarterback that's going to be my solution rest of the season? Oftentimes that's a trap. Not that I understand why you want to do it. And somebody like Tannehill may be the solution, but I think you should definitely look at who's got the better matchups this week and next week, and really still be focused on winning now.
Cool. All right. So this person has a question about Todd Gurley. Is Todd Gurley back in everyone's good graces? Is he fool's gold compared to wide receiver twos? I like him, and I think, yes, he could be fool's gold. But I've liked him all season, so That's my opinion, and I'm holding on to him or trying to buy low. What do you think, Byron?
Well, you've always, I mean, that's what you've always kind of been concerned about. That's been the whole book on Gurley this year, and even last year, right? Like his value, you feel nervous about owning him because his value is very much tied to really to getting into the end zone this year, being tied to this offense that has been able to score some points. You're definitely worried that thing's going to dry up a little bit, and we've discussed it earlier. I think Todd Gurley at the appropriate time is a good guy to try to sell high on to get yourself to a player that you trust more the rest of the season. That said, they've got an excellent schedule right now. We're trying to win right now, and who are you trading up for? It can't be a marginal move. So I just think most people, the right move is to just play him right now during this really soft portion of the schedule, get some wins, get what you can out of him, and then when you see that schedule's about to tighten up on the horizon, that'll be the time to see about shipping him off.
So if you're on the buying side, if you want to roster him, my thought is, psychologically speaking, I think people are going to hope that they can get rid of him and get a decent option back because of that one game up. And they're nervous that his production is going to dip back down. So if we know that his schedule is going to offer for a lot of upside of the next few weeks, I'm trading for him, and I'm hoping that the person doesn't have recency bias from his last game. And I'm expecting that person that I'm trading, I have recency bias. When in reality, I know that the perceived value from the person that's got him on the roster now is lower, and I know the expected value of him moving forward over the next few weeks in this soft part of the schedule is going to be higher. It's going to let me trade again in 4 weeks and get rid of Gurley for somebody who would be an improvement for my roster.
Yeah, so I think so much of the market value for players like this is determined or contingent upon the perception within your league, and that can be quite different from league to league. So there's not like a boilerplate template for this. Yeah, man, if you need a win now, I've been saying it for weeks, like Gurley is a good guy to do it. So to your point, Yasin, we talk about consolidating players often, taking two players, packaging them together, and trying to trade up for the best player in return. That's a good winning strategy for teams that are performing well and have the assets to pull that off. Look, the flip side of that is, if you're a losing team who needs to win now, and you've got maybe only a couple of assets that are marketable, you have to consider, especially if they have bad matchups or if they're injured, you have to consider, if you've identified the reason you are struggling is because you have holes in your starting lineup every week and you're not fielding the most competitive starting lineup that you could every week, you have to kind of think about just biting the bullet, taking one of your best players, liquidating them down. So instead of trading 2 for 1, in a liquidation trade, you take one good player and break him out for 2 players in return. And most of the time, you can get people to quote unquote overpay for the premium player in that deal. So what does that do? That potentially brings 2 buy low players back to you with good matchups this week and in the foreseeable future that you like, respectable good players, and that can help you replenish a more complete and competitive actual starting lineup to help you get wins this week. So if I've got a player, if I'm short and I got one player that I can maybe break out into 2, I would love to get Gurley back as one of those 2 players because I think he's a guy that can help me win right now.
Yeah, that's a good call. I agree with all of that. Let's talk about waivers, running backs. This guy seems to be in dire running back situation. He's got Montgomery as his RB1. The options off the wire are DeAndre Swift, and we also have, Harris from the Patriots and Peterson of the Lions. Who are we picking up? DeAndre Swift, Damian Harris, or Adrian Peterson?
I would pick up Swift, Peterson. Who was the other one, Yasin? I think it was the other guy.
Damian Harris.
Damian Harris. I mean, we'll see if that thing can be anything but a running back by committee in New England. That's very unclear, but at this point, I think he's the guy that you would take your chance on there. I do like Swift as a stash for later in the season, especially in PPR. I think he'll get his at some point. Peterson, if you got to play him, it's kind of like begrudgingly you put him as an RB3, but I think you can maybe live with that if you have to. But if I'm going waiver wire, Damian Harris, and by the way, he mentioned he's got David Montgomery. Like, this could be the David Montgomery breakout week. That schedule's about to ease up. He's coming off of 2 incredibly difficult matchups against the Colts and the Buccaneers. I believe it's the Panthers this week, which it is the Panthers. That's the team that's been letting running backs go bananas on them all season. Guys, I think you can really, really hope for a good performance by David Montgomery this week.
Yeah, great. That's good to hear. All right, so let's talk about Tampa Bay and Green Bay. Battle of the Bays. Brady, any chance he outperforms Rodgers on Sunday? There's healthy wide receivers on both sides. Tampa defense seems better, according to this person. I would agree. But can they stop Green Bay's offensive machine?
Well, losing Vita Vea, the stalwart in the middle of that defensive line, that's a blow. I mean, that's a very good defense with a lot of good personnel. So I think it'll still be a formidable defense. I think they'll be able to recover from that. But that is a significant loss. I think otherwise you'd be pretty concerned about this being a tough matchup for Aaron Jones, who's obviously a must start. I think that helps him. Obviously, it's good for Rodgers anytime you lose an opposing defensive player of that caliber, especially along the line. Yeah, I do think Tom Brady can outscore Aaron Rodgers. And you said it, Yasin. The reason is why is because it looks like he's going to have his healthy full complement of weapons and receivers. And if that's the case, Brady can go out there and hang 3-4 touchdowns on you just like Aaron Rodgers can. So it's not clear to me which quarterback will perform better. I mean, actually Brady's going to have the better matchup, and I believe that one at home too, I believe. So Tampa Bay at home, 52-point game total. Actually, Tampa Bay favored by 3 points. Sure, I think you can play Brady this week and feel pretty good about it. And, by the way, Chris Godwin, he's been one of my favorite buy low targets in all of fantasy the last couple of weeks. I think out of sight, out of mind. People were already worried about having to draft him in the second round. And I see all over the message boards at rosterwatch.com, people sick and tired of Chris Godwin. If that has somehow become the sentiment in your league mates have it all wrong. Chris Godwin is a guy you want to own. If there's any way to roster that guy as a wide receiver 3 or a flex, you will be thanking me later in the season over at Roster Watch that was a season changer for you. Godwin is a monster. Again, a guy I've seen twice at training camp the last few years. Saw him this year with Brady. He's been good when he's in. Chris Godwin, no joke. If you guys can get your hands on him, that's a player you absolutely love to acquire at this point.
Very cool. All right, let's talk about quarterbacks again. We have a question coming in asking about their backup quarterback. Who do we like better, Tannehill or Herbert, rest of the season?
Well, Herbert's on a bye. So if you need a guy this week, I don't think you really have a choice. You got to go with Tannehill. You could argue it's pretty close. I'm in love with Justin Herbert. At this point, I'd probably say Tannehill just because we maybe feel like he's a little bit of a known commodity. But, dude, I put waiver claims in for Justin Herbert in my own league this week, and I never try to pick up quarterbacks when they're on a bye. He's a dude you want to stash. You want to stash in case this – I think he's for real. He looks like a young John Elway almost out there. As a matter of fact, Yasin, I was tweeting this the other night. I think I can list on one finger the number of if Herbert continues to look like this, I can list on one finger the young quarterbacks in this league that I like more as a prospect moving forward if I was an NFL GM. And that would be Patrick Mahomes. That would be Patrick Mahomes.
You said on one finger.
Yeah, one finger. Patrick Mahomes. I mean, if Herbert's going to maintain looking like this, I think he's absolutely one of the best young quarterback prospects. Better than Josh Allen, better than Lamar Jackson. I don't think it's clear that Joe Burrow is any better than he is at this point. I think he's better than Kyler Murray if this keeps up as a long-term quarterback, NFL quarterback. So yeah, man, he should be rostered if you can. But I think if I got to choose one, I'll go with Tannehill right now.
Cool. Just to close the loop on Tampa Bay health, Bruce Arians does not expect anybody to miss the game, which is good news for Tampa Bay. All right, so let's move over to this comment about Marvin Jones. Cody is thinking that Marvin Jones has sleeper potential this week. He sees him having a big game. What do you think?
I mean, I don't think about Marvin Jones anymore, really. I mean, that's a desperation play. I know you're trying to. It's like you're trying to convince yourself that this thing that's such a thin play is going to work out. It could be. Marvin Jones is a desperation play, Justin. So it depends on what your other options are.
Cool. Let's go. Are we dropping Drew Brees from Stafford?
if you need a play this week, yeah, because the Breeze is on a bye. Look, Stafford's been pretty good, and I like his matchup this week. Actually, he has a couple of good matchups on the horizon, so I don't have a problem with that. It's a little bit of a lateral move, but if you need a guy, I would look at the matchups. And if you need a guy this week, it's clearly Stafford. So it's unclear, but I would have no problem dropping Breeze for Stafford if I needed to.
Okay. Yeah, Arians just said Chris Godwin has looked the best he's looked in a while in practice this week. So that's great news.
That guy's a freak, man. Watch out.
Great.
By the way, Ronald Jones, guys. I mean, that's a situation I'm very, very, very intimate with. I've been at camp the last 2 years. I was at camp at the end of camp this year, watching Ronald Jones get all the snaps. I was over at Jacksonville Jaguars camp, right, breaking the news. Fournette was basically about to get cut. So I've kind of seen this whole thing manifest in Tampa, and I'll tell you, I mean, Ronald Jones is a volume play at this point, and there's a chance that Arians keeps letting him lead this deal because he's so good between the tackles, but he's not scoring any touchdowns. He's gotten the targets, but we know he's not a good receiver. We got Leonard Fournette healthy now. I think logic dictates, guys, that if you can try to sell high on Ronald Jones, that's another guy to think about parlaying into a player that you trust more the rest of the season. If you need to play him this week, I just think you got to plan on him being a running back 3.
Cool. I'm sure this is about to come out in the app, by the way, but DJ Chark is officially listed as questionable. Let's move over to DJ Chark and the guys over there in Jacksonville. What do you think of those wide receivers? What do you think of Gardner Minshew? I want to Jacksonville a little bit.
Well, 52-point game total, Jacksonville at home. Let's see. It looks like, actually, surprisingly, okay, so Detroit is a 2.5-point favorite on the road at Jacksonville. So this is why we're interested in Stafford as well. We're interested in both quarterbacks in this game. Yeah, I think Gardner Minshew is just a fine waiver wire quarterback this week. Like, he's a fine guy to start. He was actually pretty high up on the waiver wire cheat sheet over at Rosterwatch this week. Look, Yasin, I've been telling you about Laviska Shenault for how long now, man? Before the season started, you know that much.
Yep.
And that guy's the real deal. You're playing him anyways. Obviously, if you hear that Chark is out, you just feel a lot better about getting Shenault in your lineup, which, by the way, Shenault was somehow still available in like 60, I think about 60% of leagues globally this week, which just absolutely blew my mind. He has to be owned, and in most leagues, he needs to be started if you're in a competitive league. So no Chark. You feel awesome about getting Shenault in there. I think we're seeing him pick up more production in the receiving game than just maybe as kind of a gadget guy that he was somewhat earlier in the season. I think that's.
So with Chark questionable, and let's assume for now that he's out, what does this potentially mean for Shenault?
I mean, it's going to mean more targets for Shenault. It also means Keelan Cole is relevant this week. Keelan Cole is a thing in Jacksonville. He's a player I've seen there for years. He had a great training camp while I was there. So no Chark. You guys need to remember that Keelan Cole, I mean, you asked me about a Marvin Jones. I'd probably rather start a Keelan Cole in a desperation situation this week if there's no DJ Chark. And by the way, if we start to get to the point where people have lost so much faith in somebody like DJ Chark, like, give that guy to me as a throw-in on a trade. I'll put him at the bottom of my bench. I like that.
Cool. Nice. All right. So we have Jacksonville. They're playing the Lions. So we talked about the quarterback situation. We talked about Marvin Jones. We haven't talked about Galladay. What are you expecting out of Galladay?
Well, let's see here. Let's see. We got Hawkinson. Let me see. Hawkinson has a pretty good matchup. Hold on. Let me toggle over here to Galladay really quickly, Yasin. So we've got Kenny Galladay. With an excellent matchup against Chris Claybrook. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, if you have Galladay, you're starting him. And he's been good ever since he got back from the hamstring injury. But, yeah, you're pumped about firing up Galladay. He looks like a great play on the season at this point. So, yeah, if you got Galladay, this is what you've been living for and waiting for, and you feel awesome about getting him in this week.
Cool. All right. So, I mean, we discussed this a little earlier, but it deserves attention again. So we just talked about the news that just came out with DJ Chark being questionable, what that means for everybody. And obviously that means Keelan Cole up, Shenault up. Let's talk about Kansas City backfield, though. We're back in, it's unlike Bell is not going to play this weekend. It's not clear what his role is going to be over the next 2 weeks, but let's talk about Clyde and what his value is and what we're expecting out of that backfield moving forward. I think we need to talk about it in two different ways. What do the next 2 weeks look like? What does the rest of the season look like?
Yeah, I think that you use him while you got him because he is going to keep the lead in that backfield for at least 1 or 2 weeks. And it's really still unclear exactly how Andy Reid, what his intentions are here. Like, everybody's already assuming that Le'Veon Bell is going to come in and take the job from Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Well, wasn't that what everybody was assuming about Leonard Fournette when he was signed by the Bucs he would do to Ronald Jones? Now, I do view Edwards-Helaire as more of a satellite back than Ronald Jones, and he's obviously a rookie. So I do think it puts him in far more jeopardy of Le'Veon Bell coming in and taking this job over as the season progresses. But yeah, I think that what's going to happen is you're going to have an overreaction to Clyde right now, when really you should be starting him this week and next week. And to tell you the truth, I think he's probably a flex the rest of the year attached to that offense. It's going to be hard. It could be hard to time when to play him. But I would probably value Clyde Edwards-Helaire as a flex, maybe a flex 2 the rest of the season, and just be hopeful that maybe things work out a little bit better than that. And Bell, I think at this point you're not able to really play Bell yet, but pretty soon you're going to be thinking of him as a flex. And surely if you have own Bell right now, like, your wildest dreams are that over the course of the next month, he'll begin to take the lead in this job, which would be an absolute boon for Bell connected to this offense, who, with his bigger body, should be able to get in the end zone. Edwards-Helaire, 0 for 7 on red zone attempts.
Patriots have canceled practice and media availability for today.
Oh my goodness, Yasin.
After a positive test.
Boy, it's a wacky season, huh?
Oh yeah, that's huge. All right, so we've already talked about New England, but let's go back.
What time is that game, Yasin? Is that a noon game? Let's see here.
No, well, 1 o'clock my time, so 1 o'clock Eastern. All right, so Patriots are canceling practice today because of a positive test. Now remember, we've had a lot of positive tests come back as false positives. They'll be canceling their practice today. There's also a second test that they are waiting to confirm is a positive. So what does this mean? I think this is going to have ripple effects because it's Friday. This is not early week.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, it's going to be an early game. So hopefully, before you have to make decisions, you have the information before you have to decide what you're going to do with the players that you have available to you in the later games on your bench. Obviously, at this point, you can't really rely on Cam until we hear more. So I think if he's been your quarterback option this week, you better run to your waiver wire. Make sure you have a Minshew or a Tannehill, a Dalton, one of these guys that we've discussed. Maybe even a sneaky Daniel Jones, like I said, I think in a potential breakout spot this week. So that's probably the number one priority at this point, because that's the main guy you're going to be, utilizing potentially from New England side. I don't think you're relying on N'Keal Harry. At this point, you're not relying on Julian Edelman. At this point, Damian Harris is a bench guy that's a stash that you're thinking about flexing, but surely you probably have other options than him. So I think that's going to be the situation. If you're a Cam Newton owner, you better find options right now. Yeah,
I agree. All right. So let's talk about what that might mean for Denver. So here's the good news, right? These aren't two very, very relevant fantasy teams, right? You should already have options that are where you're able to replace these guys. You should have already been prepared for not having Cam from last week. So hopefully you already have a backup quarterback roster, right? This is now going to open up your, whether you're a good manager or not. Do you have enough bench depth? Because you're going to need it. But it's not like anybody was rostering and starting a bunch of Patriots or Broncos. So while it's terrible news for the NFL, and they might end up having to reschedule it after this canceled practice because of the positive test, I don't think that the effect is going to be significant enough beyond really Cam and Judy, where it's going to impact everybody's rosters too much. What do you think?
mean, is it wrong for me to say that we're actually lucky if this is the one that goes up in flames this week, Yasin?
I think it is wrong to say, but I get what you're saying.
Look, we talked about it earlier. Jerry Jeudy was probably like, obviously we're watching what's happened with the New England backfield. That was something we were going to be monitoring closely. Maybe we can just forget about that headache this week. And then Jerry Jeudy would be the other primary guy on the Denver side, who already was going to have a difficult matchup potentially with Gilmore this week. So, it's kind of a wide receiver 3-ish, 4-ish type this week. I think you can back off, plan on going to some of your other options.
Cool. All right. So we know that news came out. It's unfortunate. But if that news pushes back that game, at least it won't impact fantasy too much. And maybe there is that silver lining that it is that game. Let's talk about just a quick note on A.J. Brown. He did say he's close to 100%. He said no one is 100% right now, which I think is that's typical for mid-season. Nobody is really 100%, and you have battered teams going up against battered teams. So it's as good as it's going to get. So on the Patriots news, it was a player who tested positive. The second positive test is still going through the process to confirm. The team's been doing meetings virtually today anyway, and obviously practice and media availability has been canceled. No idea on who the player might be, but that should be, it shouldn't impact fantasy too much. Let's go back to questions. Let's talk about this person, and I want to talk about Claypool separately anyway. But PPR, who are we starting? This person needs to pick one for flex. Deontay Johnson, Chark, which I would say no to because he's officially questionable. I'm not sure if he's going to play or not. Claypool, and I understand why he's there as your flex, and I understand why people are rostering him. You don't see too many 4-touchdown games. And you have Chase Edmonds. Who are we picking for flex and PPR?
I think really what you're hoping here is that maybe Deontay Johnson won't play this week and Chase Claypool will get a lion's share. And if that's the case, I would go with him. But have we got an update on Deontay Johnson? I saw Juju Smith-Schuster had his return after being out on Wednesday. I was still waiting to see Deontay Johnson, who left the game with a back injury and did not return last week. I think that's going to be critical to making He did come back.
He was back at practice yesterday. He was limited with the back injury, but he was back at practice.
Well, to tell you the truth, if Chark plays, he's the guy I'd play out of all these dudes because I think you're playing a little bit of a game of roulette with Claypool and Deontay Johnson. And then Edmonds, he's trending in the right direction. But, I mean,
so Chark is
still on the back end, he's in a committee, and it's hard to predict.
So Chark is an early game. It's a 1:00 game. If Chark is out, you still have time to slot in one of these other guys. Who's your second pick?
I guess it'd probably be Claypool, right? I mean, probably Claypool. Go back to that well. And
I'm in agreement. I think that's fine. All right. This person needs to sit one in PPR. Who are you sitting? Ridley, Godwin, McLaurin, Fuller, or Kupp? I know who I'm sitting. Who are you sitting?
McLaurin.
Ooh, okay. I'm sitting Fuller, but I'm not actually. I'm sitting McLaurin. They're playing the Giants, and their quarterback situation is sort of unclear, and I don't know what his relationship is with the quarterback yet. So I'm in agreement with you.
I think it's always good, tiebreaker, to just connect yourself to the better quarterback, the better offense, to the higher game totals, and I think that leaves McLaurin the odd man out. But those are all terrific options. What a wide receiver depth chart that user has.
Yeah, agreed. So just an FYI to everybody for Browns game, Odell Beckham is questionable. Let me take a look at what else is coming out of there. Baker Mayfield is a full participant, so he's fine. And that's really the only big name there that's questionable for that game in terms of fantasy. Jarvis Landry is also questionable, I should say. But Jarvis and Baker both practiced. They're both questionable, but Odell didn't actually have a full practice today, from my understanding. I'm still expecting him to play, though. Just to close the loop there, though, on the Browns. Okay, so let's talk about this person has a trade question. Is trading away Kareem Hunt and Robbie Anderson for Travis Kelce good in my scenario? This person already has Zeke, Aaron Jones, and Jacobs as their running backs. Wide receivers are Ridley, Cooper, and A.J. Brown. I love trade questions. I'm going to give my opinion first. I think tight ends are underdrafted. I think they're undervalued, especially the top-tier guys. You don't have a lot of depth at tight end. A lot of people end up streaming by mid to end of the season anyway. Travis Kelce's not a guy that you're going to have to worry about too much with the consistency of his production, or if he's going to be, a top 3 tight end. So I'm actually for this trade. Byron, maybe you have an opinion on if this person is overpaying with Kareem Hunt and Robbie Anderson, because I think maybe there's overpayment potential there. But I just think Travis Kelce is too hot of a commodity to let go.
Well, so when you go after the most elite players in fantasy, especially when they're not in some type of buy low moment, you're always going to have to overpay for those guys, quote unquote. But it's okay to do if you've got the assets to do it. So to me, the running backs look good. I think he's going to be fine there. But how does losing Robbie Anderson, how is that going to affect your wide receivers? Maybe not much, because he's probably a guy that you drafted late. I think it's a fair trade. I think it's a fair trade to go get Kelce. Now, I'll always say the way I prefer to trade for tight ends is take the current tight end I have, hopefully if it's a decent one, slap another good skill player on there, and then go after the upgrade at tight end. I think that's the best way to do it, but that may not be an option for this user. And yeah, I think that's a fair deal for Kelce, and probably a good move for that team.
Cool. Just on the Browns, Jarvis Landry is progressing very, very tough. Coach Stefanski is saying he is making a push to play on Sunday like he always does. Again, I know he's listed as questionable, but I'm expecting Jarvis Landry to play. This person, Josh, is asking if he should be starting Galladay or Woods. I have an opinion here. I think he's starting Galladay over Woods, and I like Woods, but I think Galladay just has too attractive of a matchup. What do you think, Byron?
As would I, Yasin. We saw it earlier. Galladay has an awesome wide receiver cornerback matchup, and it's just a really great spot. Galladay's been awesome. So, yeah, he's the guy, man.
Cool. All right. So Marco has a question. Marco wants to know in standard for his flex. He needs 2. Deebo Samuel, Deontay Johnson, David Johnson, and Jamison Crowder. And I actually don't have a strong opinion here. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you got to go with David Johnson, and then look, Crowder's been getting a massive target volume, but it's very difficult for me to tell people to play Jamison Crowder. So I would go with David Johnson. I'd choose between Deebo Samuel and Deontay Johnson. Deebo really kind of made you nervous last week just based on how that offense performed. But I would look at the matchups there. I might lean Deebo Samuel just based on the fact that it looks like, the more Claypool's emerging, it's unclear. Is Deontay Johnson going to return to that same target share this week that he was getting the first, few weeks of the season?
Cool. Start one in standard. Graham or Tanyan?
Ooh. Boy, Jimmy Graham, the revival of Jimmy Graham. What a story that has been. Well, I think we should look at that.
I don't understand. It's been like we're like at the end of a 4-year story of disappointment. So the fact that we're saying it's what a story, I don't know. Maybe I've just been burned by him too much in the past, but I'm still seeing it as a blip on the radar, and I'm expecting he's going to be back down to reality soon. Sounds like you have a different opinion.
No, not necessarily. It's been kind of a surprise. But look, they need that guy in Chicago, because outside of Allen Robinson, they don't have anybody else to really go to, especially in the red zone. I think I would start Tanyan, though. I'd want to get connected to Aaron Rodgers. A little bit better matchup in terms of the evaluation of the defensive backs they'll be facing. I just don't. Jimmy Graham, you're praying for a touchdown. I think Tanyan, you connect yourself to Aaron Rodgers, and you could just get a little more organic production. I think maybe his floor is a little bit higher.
Cool. All right.
But Graham can give you a goose egg, right? I mean, all these guys can, but Graham could really goose egg you if you're not careful.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to go to the app. We're going to do rapid-fire questions. Drop one. Chenault or Gallup? Who are you dropping?
Gallup.
Byron says Gallup. All right. You think Madison eats this week, or will Boone mess things up for him? I personally think Madison eats this week. What do you think?
Yeah, the big dog's going to eat this week for sure.
Cool. Let's see. Okay, this is a good question. I have an opinion here. Are Fulgham and Claypool wide receiver 2s rest of the season? I think it's too early to tell. I think, Deontay Johnson wasn't in the game, so it's a little difficult to assume Claypool is not just wide receiver 2 on the team, but just a wide receiver 2 in general for fantasy. And Fulgham, it's 1 week. I think it's too early to make the call on either of these guys. I think they should be Byron, you mentioned that you think it sounds like you think both of them should at least be on rosters. But I think it's way too early to say that they're wide receiver 2 rest of the season. What do you think?
Well, you bring me on for bold takes. You don't want me to equivocate. So not only is it too early to say, Yasin, but I'll go ahead and I think it's unlikely that they're wide receiver 2s on the season for a variety of reasons. You're going to have a lot of other guys coming back into the fold in Philadelphia. And Travis Fulgham, a totally unheralded rookie. The odds are against a guy like that. And I think there's been a target void there that he's been able to fill the last few weeks. I don't trust Carson Wentz even at this point. So I think that's a hard situation to buy into long-term as a wide receiver 2. And then the deal with Claypool, not only do we potentially have, look, there's other good players there. Like Deontay Johnson is good. Juju is good. Even James Washington is pretty good. They got Eric Ebron is pretty good. I think when you add all that up and you say, okay, that Claypool is 52% touchdown dependent, which is astronomical on the year. He's producing at 2.88 fantasy points per target, which is an enormous outlier statistically versus any really relevant fantasy players. It's difficult to make the argument that in that situation that he'll be able to maintain, numbers even remotely close to that. So it's too early to tell, but to be fair, I think you should plan on those guys being like flex plays the rest of the season. It would be a responsible way to look at that.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. All right. We have a question from JP. He's asking Chenault, Hilton, Gage, Cooks, or Patrick. They want us to choose 2. How about we do it this way? Can we eliminate one each? I'd like to eliminate Gage.
And I think I might eliminate Hilton.
Huh?
I agree. And I think I'd eliminate Hilton. I'm just not ready to buy it yet.
Oof, ouch. Okay. I'm eliminating Patrick.
Oh, okay. I thought Patrick. Okay, Patrick is the other receiver. I'm sorry. I was thinking Patrick was. You're talking about Tim Patrick? Yeah. Eliminate him for sure, right?
Probably before Hilton, right? I was like, wow, the disrespect to Hilton.
Yeah. Well, we don't even know if this game's going to be played, so eliminate Patrick for sure.
That's right. All right. So we're talking Cooks and Chenault are the 2, right?
I think so. I mean, it's a good situation to tie yourself to.
Yeah.
None of these guys are guarantees.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so there's a conversation happening about somebody in a 10-team league and other people being in a 12-team league and the competitiveness in this. Guys, it's fantasy football. It's supposed to be fun. Playing an 8-team league, you know what? 8-team leagues are a blast. You're not going to go writing. You're not going to start giving fantasy advice because you crushed it in your 8-team league. But it's an 8-team league, and it was probably a bunch of fun with 7 other friends. Have fun with it. It's fine. And you know what? We'll still give you advice on 18 leagues. We'll give you advice on 12 and 16-team leagues too. I'm probably not qualified to give you advice on 16-team leagues, but we have Byron from Rosterwatch who literally goes to training camps and builds tools for fantasy. So he'll give you the advice on the 16-team leagues. But guys, as long as you're having fun, you're doing it right. Okay, so it's totally fun. All right, guys. So let's talk about Lindsey or Graham. This is an interesting one. Full PPR. Lindsey, I think, is sneaky because I don't know what's happening with Melvin Gordon yet, and we are actively monitoring this. I mean, he was right up there for us, monitoring the news for Melvin Gordon and Le'Veon Bell. Le'Veon Bell happened to break while Twitter was down, by the way, which I was very excited to get that news out, even though Twitter was down. But Melvin Gordon might actually be the biggest storyline. What's going to happen over the next few weeks, I don't know. And I don't want us to speculate here. What I do want is to talk about how Lindsey might perform in the absence of Melvin Gordon this week compared to Ingram. Who you got?
Well, I mean, if we know there's no Melvin Gordon, then I would absolutely start Philip Lindsay, and it wouldn't even be a close call. I mean, Mark Ingram, the definition of a guy you can't trust this year, is a very, very thin play. You're praying for that guy to get in the end zone. And when he does, you should try to trade him and get him off your team so you don't have this headache. anymore. So I think you're hoping that Gordon is going to be limited or out, and if that's the situation, I think Lindsey's a pretty easy choice. And truthfully, even if they say Gordon is in, I mean, you have to hate Mark Ingram at this point. I mean, maybe he's a little bit of a safer play if Gordon. I think if Gordon plays a safe play as Ingram, but it's very close.
Yeah. So let's stop answering questions for a quick minute because I do want to talk about Baltimore's backfield. We didn't do that yet today. It's again, this is another one of those where I can't call it a monster. It's more like like a little puppy. Talk about this backfield. What are you expecting next few weeks?
I think that J.K. Dobbins is a really nice guy to just stash at the bottom of your bench. He's basically completely lost value in leagues. He's on a lot of waiver wires. I think he's a guy you could get literally as like a zero value throw in on any deal you were looking to do. So I think he's an interesting guy just to stash because to me, they need a guy like Dobbins, and they have every incentive to start getting him more and more involved. And he's just the most explosive player there. So that's the way I look at it. I think Gus Edwards is a guy, if like you're in an ultra desperation mode, even though there's three guys, like you can't expect a good game out of Edwards, but like there's some leagues, like you said, 14-team, 16-team leagues where there's nobody on the wire. And like Edwards is a guy, if you're in one of those competitive leagues, desperation, you don't like it, but I think if it's an ultra competitive deep league, like you can take a look at Edwards if you have to. It's just a bad situation, Yasin, right? We want to stay away from bad situations if we can.
Yeah. All right. So this is a pretty good question. This person has an option. I assume something that is an option to them. Do they trade away Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Marquise Brown for Chris Carson in full PPR? I personally like that trade. You should also know that it seems like they could swap out Marquise Brown for Brandon Cooks as well.
Yeah, so I would definitely do that trade. That's a great deal if you're getting Chris Carson in return. And I'm assuming you have the depth to pull it off. I think so, with the players we're talking about here. And yeah, I'd probably rather keep Hollywood Brown than Brandon Cooks. So if I could, I would send Brandon Cooks, who is the definition of a sell high at the moment, along with Clyde. I think you're getting great value in return Chris Carson. You're lucky if you could turn Clyde Edwards-Helaire into Chris Carson at this point, especially only having to slap somebody like Brandon Cooks onto the deal.
Yeah. So this person, by the way, their running backs are pretty solid, and I think this would make them a killer team. But they already have Helaire, Jonathan Taylor, and Josh Jacobs. So I think adding Chris Carson and giving up CEH is an awesome.
It's a no-brainer. My goodness.
I just don't know if the person's going to accept. You might need to wait a week and see if CEH a week or two and see if they have value or the perceived value actually goes up after the Bell trade, because that perceived value might have taken a hit in the short term. Okay, so we have more questions coming in. Let's go half PPR, Montgomery, Freeman, David Johnson. I assume this means pick one. Actually, no, they updated their question. Half PPR, Montgomery, Freeman, David Johnson, Singletary, or Swift. Pick two.
I want Montgomery and David Johnson. Based on the volume and based on the matchups.
Yeah, normally I wouldn't go Montgomery, but this week, I mean, I agreed with what you were saying earlier. This does seem like if there is going to be a breakout week for Montgomery, this is sort of it.
Yep.
Okay, let's go full PPR. Pick three to start. Amari Cooper, Robert Woods, Robbie Anderson, Jamison Crowder. Who are you sitting?
I mean, I'm starting the first three, and I'm sitting Jamison Crowder. I get it. I get the argument for Crowder, but there's just I can't I can't sleep easy at night knowing that I put Jamison Crowder in over Amari Cooper, Robert Woods, or even Robbie Anderson. Robbie Anderson has gotten 24 targets over the last 2 weeks, 12 targets a game over the last 2 weeks, 9.5 targets per game on the season. Like, that's a real deal with Bridgewater and Carolina, Robbie Anderson. So I'm going with the first three and feeling very, very good about it.
Cool. All right. So let's talk about trade questions. So if they should try and trade Edmonds to the Drake owner now, or assume that Edmonds will take over the starting role and hold. This might be so. Let's answer the last piece. Do we assume that Edmonds will take over the starting role and hold? Because I think the trade question is a little too involved without knowing the roster personally.
Yeah, so I think that a couple things. I think this depends on what you can get for Edmonds. I mean, that's going to be a big part of the equation, whether this makes sense or not. And by the way, I've been saying for weeks now, like if you own Edmonds, if you own Madison, if you own Pollard, the Madison owner got lucky this week, but if you own Pollard, Edmonds, Latavius Murray, any of these guys, and you weren't the owner of the principal running back in that situation, like those were just got zero running back guys that you drafted and they're not handcuffs on your team, like they were starting to lose almost all of their value a couple of weeks ago to the point where folks were thinking about dropping him. And I was imploring people like, don't drop him. Go to the owner of the principal back in that backfield and trade them to them, because see what you can get. That's like before you just drop them, because that backup, that handcuff does have value to that other owner in your league who owns the Drake or the Kamara or the Zeke or whoever it is. So that was my line of thought a week or two ago. I think now we're getting closer to actually thinking Edmonds could possibly take the job. So I can see how he's not totally valueless at the moment. But yeah, I think if I could get something respectable in return, Yasin, if I could get a flex, or if I could take Edmonds, the best thing is to take Edmonds, take another player you think is a sell high on your roster, go identify a good buy low candidate on the Kenyon Drake's roster, and try to trade up for a player. And I think you'll feel good in return, and you just don't have to worry about this situation anymore. The idea that Edmonds just going to run away with 20 touches a game, like that's very unlikely.
I agree with that. I'm going back to the app. Mecole Hardman or Brandon Cooks for flex half PPR.
I think we were without Sammy Watkins.
Sammy Watkins is not practicing today. It seems very unlikely that he'll play.
Which I think made Hardman a pretty darn good waiver wire pickup this week. He's got a good matchup against anybody not named Tre'Davious White over there against the Bills this week. Let me look at the game totals on this one. I would imagine the Chiefs are going to have the big 55-point game total versus Cooks, we said was in that same game total on the road at Houston. I think I go with Hardman. And just the week that Sammy Watkins is out, I think I buy into Patrick Mahomes. I buy into Hardman there.
Cool. Very cool. All right. So in the app, we are taking a look at Fant or Cooper this week. I'm going to skip that only because we're not sure if that game is going to happen at the moment. It's also Fant seems like he's going to be truly questionable. So let's move down a little bit. Let's go. Okay. This is an okay one, only because I like the Pirine question. So the Jets backfield, we really haven't discussed it. This person wants to know Pirine or Akers from Rams this week in PPR. I want to answer that question, but I also want to ask about what you think of this Jets backfield.
Well, I mean, Pirine is, I think, clearly the guy you want to stash and see what happens with. He's a player we saw at the Senior Bowl this year. Pretty big dude, has 3-down capability. He can catch the ball. He can block. I think he's going to be good in short yardage situations. Not a player that blows you away, but he has a lot of the tools you're looking for. So Pirine is the guy to kind of zero in on and target here, see if you could stash him and just, I think, see what happens. Him versus Cam Akers this week. I mean, Akers, even though he's kind of second fiddle to Darrell Henderson last week, Akers still looked the best. I think he had the 69 yards. He had pretty good yards per carry there. Let's have a look at the matchup here. So we're going to have the Rams on the road at the 49ers, whereas we have we've got the Jets. I think that's at Miami at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, I'm just going to – it's an interesting question. I think it's actually probably closer than most people think it is. I think Pirine is a good stash at the moment, but I'm going to buy into Sean McVay. I'm going to buy into the Rams and their offensive scheme in this one, and I'd take my chances with Cam Akers.
Okay, sounds good. Brojo, a good start this week with Fournette and McCoy running back.
I think you can start Ronald Jones, but you need to retemper your expectations to probably a low floor RB3 at this point. I mean, he could go out and have a 5 or 6 pointer if he's not getting in the end zone really. So I think you can start him. I think logic dictates he's still going to come out with a pretty good workload this week based on how he's been playing the last couple of weeks there. But he's been pretty inefficient from a fantasy perspective. And like I said earlier, if any of that volume erodes, I think we could be in trouble with Ronald Jones. So I would treat him as an RB3 this week. But if you need him, yeah, you can play him.
Okay, cool. All right, let's go back to the YouTube questions. Drop one, full PPR. Slayton, Jimmy Graham, Debo, Judy. I have an answer here. I'd like to know what you think.
I know your answer.
I'm going to say Jimmy Graham, and I think you knew that was coming.
Well, because clearly if you're dropping Jimmy Graham, he's your backup tight end, and we're never going to advocate for rostering backup tight ends unless it's, an extenuating circumstance. And I think Jimmy Graham deserves to be owned and possibly played in a lot of leagues, but not over Darius Slayton or Deebo Samuel or Jerry Jeudy on the season. That just doesn't make sense.
I agree. I'm not a fan typically not a fan of rostering 2 tight ends. This person wants to know, it's another 2 tight end question, Hawkinson or Fant this week and rest of the year?
Well, I think we have to go Hawkinson this week just based on the lack of clarity, not only with Fant's personal status, but that game potentially in jeopardy. Yeah. And otherwise, it's a very close. What's interesting, Yasin, is so these were teammates at Iowa. Actually,
I didn't even know that.
They were teammates at Iowa. They were both TJ Hawkinson's the best tight end prospect we've scouted in the 10 years we've been doing this. And Noah Fant, not too far behind, kind of more of like a O.J. Howard-ish, Evan Ingram-ish type of mold for Fant there. And they were both first-round picks last year. They both had a slow rookie year, so it's awesome to watch them break out. And also funny to think that they came just right after George Kittle was at Iowa too. So Iowa has been a freaking tight end factory. So that's a fun thing to talk about. I think it's a really, really close call rest of the season. I'm going to lean Hawkinson just based on we know he's healthy. I think we buy into Stafford a little bit there. I like the matchup this week. So I think we're going to lean Hawkinson based on those things. But, man, I mean, Fant could easily outscore Hawkinson the rest of the way. A Fant is a nice, especially with lockback, Fant is very nice, tight end keep rest of the season.
Yeah, I think for me it's one of those situations where you take a look at who's throwing the ball.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned earlier.
Look at the schedules, too. That's also important when you're not sure. But I'd go Hawkinson. He's asking about this week and rest of the year. So you bake it all in. I think you stick with TJ Hawkinson there, Cody.
Cool. All right, let's go with Logan's question. So right now, guys, Tom Pelissero is saying there's no change in the status of the Patriots-Broncos game as of now. So good news coming out of that. Sorry, guys. That's when news breaks. Okay. So let's answer this question about start one this week, full PPR. Tyler Boyd, Marquise Brown. I think this is a good question. I like this question. I think I have an opinion too. I'm going Marquise Brown, but I'm not looking at a spreadsheet like you could. So where do you have?
I think I'm going to go Hollywood too, because this is what we've seen with Hollywood Brown, Marquise Brown. Is he was 6 targets a game the first 3 games in the season, but we've seen the uptick to 8 targets and then the 10 targets the last few weeks. He's the kind of player that goes absolutely nuclear with any type of additional volume. We're going to like the matchup better here against Philadelphia. And, as much as Boyd has shown a really nice connection with Burrow, who's clearly looked like a very competent rookie quarterback, I mentioned it earlier, T. Higgins starting to emerge as possibly tracking towards the wide receiver 1 in that offense. We saw the targets dry up a little bit for Boyd last week. So I think I go Hollywood in this one, man.
Cool. All right, let's move on to Alshon. Is Alshon worth the bench stash? I want to know the answer to this because I don't know the answer. And I remember, I drafted Alshon as a bench stash, and I don't think he's on any of my rosters now. So what does Rosterwatch say, Byron? Let us know.
Well,
is he worth it?
Depends on who else is on your wire. If you're in a 12-team league, I think it's questionable whether he's a stash. I'd say 14, 16-team leagues, he's more than likely a stash just because the waiver wires are probably pretty thin. But we're not holding our breath at this point. I mean, they're talking like Fulgham is the starting X wide receiver, which is the position that Alshon plays. We're also hearing it's a pretty slow recovery for Alshon, who obviously is towards the end of his shelf life as any type of real viable NFL wide receiver. So I think he's only worth a stash if there's nobody else nobody else on your wire. It's like a desperation stash.
Yeah, I think it sounds like for the majority of people, the answer is no.
Yeah.
Because 14-team leagues, the majority of leagues are going to be 12-team leagues. The next 10-team leagues. So
and it's rotting on your bench. And really, it's what he's doing is he's monopolizing a roster spot that you could be using to a much higher and better use. Instead, you're just carrying dead weight, and that's often, especially for a marginal player, it's not a winning strategy.
Yeah. So just an FYI to you guys, Panthers did place a player, Tyler Larson, on COVID list today. We don't expect any change to their scheduled game on Sunday as of now, but just as an FYI. Okay, so with Alshon, yeah, like we mentioned, it doesn't seem like it would be for the majority of people to roster him. All right, let's talk about Clay has another question. Half PPR, pick 2 in flex. Deontay Johnson, Phillip Lindsay, Laviska Shenault, Deebo Samuel, Leonard Fournette. This one's a tough one if we were to remove one each time. So let's play that game again, though, where we each remove one at a time. You go first this time, and then you let me know if you disagree with me.
All right. Well, let's see. Maybe I'll remove Deontay Johnson.
I would have removed Deontay Johnson first, but that only makes my job harder for who to remove second.
This is about to get very difficult.
Yeah. I think I'm removing Deebo Samuel. I feel like I have to give a caveat there. I'm just nervous because we have high expectations of Deebo. We have high expectations of San Francisco in general. And he's been injured the majority of the time. And when he finally does come back, he doesn't really have a great game. So I'm just a little nervous about Deebo. I wouldn't. He's been on my bench for so long that I wouldn't mind him being there another week. So I think emotionally, I'm okay with benching Deebo because if he does go off, I'm not going to be as upset if he goes off on my bench compared to one of the other guys going off on my bench because I'm already on my bench. And I think that's important, being emotionally okay with the decision that you make.
Exactly. You can't be married to these guys. That causes you a lot of agony and acrimony in your leagues. Look, here's the deal. Deebo Samuel is going to get a lot of Jalen Ramsey this week as well, which is a really difficult matchup. Now, Deebo's the kind of guy that can get a manufactured touch out of the backfield and score on an end around in the red zone or something like that. But clearly, we don't strategize or make our plans around that. So I like that you pulled him off the board. And then to me, the next one you're going to pull Fournette off at this point. Just it's too unclear. So Lindsey looks like he's going to have a role this week. We're hearing that game's probably going to go, and you guys have heard how much I like Laviska Shenault at this point. So to me, that leaves us with Phillip Lindsay and Laviska Shenault, and I don't think that those aren't bad flexes this week.
Cool. Melvin Gordon is not practicing. Wow. Okay.
Ooh, big. That's big.
Yeah, that's a big one. So Melvin, oh boy. All right, we're gonna get some questions coming in, I'm sure, because I'm sure that'll go out in a second or so. All right, so Melvin Gordon's not practicing. Let's wait a minute to answer questions on that because people are probably gonna filter in. And let's stick to another question here for a second. So it seems like Deontay Johnson is out. Deontay, it's not what the Broncos running back. They just don't even see him at practice at the moment. So Melvin Gordon's just not at practice at all. Okay, so, okay. You know what? This question that we just answered with Deontay Johnson, Phillip Lindsay, Laviska Shenault, Deebo Samuel, and Leonard Fournette said, "Pardon me, pick 3." So I think we're going with Shenault, Lindsay, and Fournette. Is that right?
You could argue for Deontay there, but Fournette's probably I think Fournette's probably an okay play. He's going to get some touches this game.
Okay, but I think the two that you're definitely starting are Lindsey and Shenault.
Yeah, and I would kind of decide between Deontay Johnson and Fournette, but I think you can make a case that Fournette could get in the end zone this week.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk Melvin Gordon. And this might be where we need to end it, by the way. It's 1:15. Byron, do you have to jet?
I do.
Okay, so let's talk Melvin Gordon and what this means, and then we'll end it there, and hopefully we've been able to answer as many questions as possible.
Well, I mean, I think this means there's a good chance he's not going to play this weekend, or if he does, it's going to be a limited role, which if you're a Phillip Lindsay owner, this is going to be one of the more opportune times to get him in your lineup. So I think Phillip Lindsay probably, maybe you're still going to treat him as an RB3, but he could definitely have some upside this week. That's for darn sure. So you feel a lot better about that. And if you're a Melvin Gordon owner, I mean, it could be a little bit tough sledding there. Obviously you're going to have to look to your bench, and hopefully that's somebody you can replace as a flex play, so that you're not pigeonholed and having to go a wide receiver or running back only there. But that's going to be tough if you're a Gordon owner.
Yeah, I don't know. The word on the street is that he's going to be punished severely for this DUI. So
yeah. Well, wheels up, Phillip Lindsay. Then congratulations if you're a Phillip Lindsay owner.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, guys, we're gonna wrap it up. Again, this is Yasin from Fantasy Life app. This is Byron from Rosterwatch. Oh, there we go. Byron from Rosterwatch. Catch us on the app. You can also catch Byron at rosterwatch.com. They have tools, tips, things like that as part of their service.com. And obviously, if you guys don't have the Fantasy Life app, I don't know how you're playing fantasy or even sports betting, DFS and all that, because we get alerts out faster than anybody else, as probably everybody that's in here can attest to. So we're very happy to continue to do this. We will be back again next week. And hopefully we've got as many questions answered as possible. And there we go. Byron, anything to add?
No, man, I enjoyed it. What a great time. Thanks for having me on, Yasin.
All right.